Endurance athlete, a classically trained pastry chef, veteran of Michelin-starred kitchens, and former culinary director at Scratch Labs. She's taken a deep dive into holistic nutrition and Ayurvedic medicine. Did I say that right? Choosing to spend her career as a professional chef working in the sports nutrition and wellness world with athletes from amateur to Olympian. She has a new newsletter that you should subscribe to. And if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should, because she has a very beautiful curated feed. It's always fun to see her posts. And she also gives permission to eat cookies. So anyone who gives permission to eat more cookies is someone I want to listen to. So with that, thank you for joining us today, Lentine.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for that very generous introduction. And thank you to all of you for joining in. I was saying to the ladies before we logged on that I always appreciate a new opportunity to talk about this way of looking at food and fueling oneself for sport and life in a different light. And so as I've been writing notes, it's been really fun to think of a few ways to convey these ideas to you. So I appreciate the opportunity to share them, and thanks for tuning in. As Laura says, my name's Lentine Alexis. I am a former professional endurance athlete, which is the very mouthy way of saying that I didn't race bikes only, I didn't run only. I found myself in a time in my life when I was able to do adventure races and ultra distance triathlons and pretty much any type of endurance challenge that sparked my interest, and was competing at a really high level. And so that's why I call it what I call it. There's not that many titles for people that do all those crazy things besides just whack job or weirdo or whatever, masochistic. Anyway, so I was actually a professional athlete before I became a chef. I studied at Le Cordon Bleu, both in Paris, and then finished my education in the United States. And I studied pastry and bakings. I arrived at that point because I was craving things like muffin tops and donuts and cake all the time. And I really wanted to know more about how to make really healthy versions of that thing, which was the beginning of my career and ties very interestingly into where I am now in food and sport. It's important to note that I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not those things by choice. While those sciences are really important, they haven't been my passion in terms of pursuing the pedigree. But I have been working in sports nutrition and have been a student of the energetics of food and sports science for about 15 years. And I have a little bit of a different perspective on food and how to fuel for sport and life because of all those crazy things. To jump backwards a little bit, I got my start in sport as a pro when I was living abroad. I was living on a small remote Japanese island called Okinawa. My partner at the time was in the military, and he was spending basically all of his time in war zones in the Southeast Asian theater, and I was alone on the island to kind of figure out how to spend my time, and I fell into sport and had been an athlete my whole life. I was a competitive swimmer when I was a little person, like 5 and up, and swam all the way through high school, and then went to college, was actually on an Olympic development rowing team, and left the sport to basically recreate some balance, and so was a natural candidate to fall into sports where you're like waking up too early and going to do crazy things all day. And I was searching for a way to fuel these like 28 to 30 hour weeks that I was spending training for Ironman, really. And we didn't have any sport foods on this tiny island, so I had to figure out how to fuel myself without packaged gels or bars or goos or products. Which was kind of scary because I had spent all of my career in a very traditional sporting community with an education that taught me a lot about macronutrients and not a lot about listening. So that's the introduction to me. What is this new way of looking at sports nutrition that I'm talking about? Well, on this little island where I'm running around, I was by myself and I was working with a coach, but the coach was in the United States and I was in Japan. So I had to basically navigate my meal planning for myself. And I was taking everything I knew about macronutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and trying to build healthy meals for myself. And I was still zapped all the time. And I was scared because a lot of the things that I had been taught were, you know, good and bad foods were impossible for me to find. There were big bowls of ramen with huge pork shoulders in them and tons of rice and tons of carbohydrates. And I felt like there was sugar and fat and salt and everything. And a lot of those ingredients went against, you know, my inclination, my intuition, or what I thought I knew about sports nutrition. It brought up a lot of judgment in my body. Navigating that eating culture found me, or how can I say that? What are the words I'm looking for? Navigating that eating culture was challenging for me because I was judging my body on what I was choosing. Basically, the things that were available to me felt like things I needed to earn and not things that my body needed. And so I sort of had to face that on a day-to-day basis because I'd be out riding my bike for like 120 miles and have to stop at a Japanese grocery store to get a snack. And my options were all things that felt off limits somehow. And bit by bit, I kind of broke through that, did some reading, did some investigation, consulted with a couple of experts, and managed to climb my way out of this super scary hole of food. And really found that the more I gave in to the things that my body was craving, like the big salty bowl of ramen or the umami onigiri or green tea ice cream after my ride, when that was literally everything that I felt like I wanted in the world, my performance improved and my well-being improved and my sharpness in the world was boosted, and my passion for my sport was boosted too. And so it was kind of this cool breadcrumb trail of finding new things, trying new foods, and kind of using my body as an experiment. I was blowing through all the calories, and the more I really fell into delicious, beautiful, really flavorful foods, the more I was rewarded for that. And so that was the first kind of breaking away from this traditional science that I'd always embraced, but didn't necessarily feel like spoke to me in a true and honest way. And so what I started to learn and have learned more and more through the years is that traditional sports nutrition does an exceptional job of deconstructing our food and telling us exactly how important all the different parts are. It's really important that we recognize what the role of carbohydrates and fats and salt and different antioxidants, different macro and micronutrients. But what we don't do a great job of in traditional sports science with respect to nutrition is putting it all together again in one piece that accurately reflects the whole. Some of the things that get left out often are the seasonality of the ingredients and the energetics of the foods that we're eating, the way that we eat them in combination, the wholeness of our lives, not just what we're doing in our sport, but also what stress and pressure and relaxation and rest look like in our day-to-day lives. And that's a piece of the sports nutrition picture that we need to create for ourselves. And what I really sought to do in my creation of recipes and menus and activations and storytelling through my work now is to tell that whole picture again. And a lot of that and a lot of the way that we can navigate this nutrition picture is through flavor. Are there any questions so far, just to make sure that I'm making sense? All good. Seems good. No one's chatting, so you're listening intently. I see your faces. This is great. Okay, nodding heads. Perfect. So I have some notes here if you see me like scanning this way, it's because I have a lot of notes over here that I'm looking at. So putting our foods back together again, eating whole, real foods. As athletes, we're great at ignoring our sensory experiences in the sense that pain is something we push aside. We have to compete and to win or to reach our goals. We're really great at suppressing our cravings and those deep inner intuitions that we are having. And to really, something I've found and something I truly believe in is that we really have to reconnect with all those sensory experiences to be able to fuel ourselves completely. And the cravings we have for flavors are one of those ways that we can start to tap back into that internal knowledge a wisdom that's far deeper than a nutrition label. Basically, learning to read our bodies instead of reading just a nutrition label is something that's ridiculously important. And Ayurveda, as Laura mentioned, is a system that really champions this idea. It's an ancient traditional medicine system that was founded in India and the Asian subcontinent thousands of years ago. The foundational belief is that food is medicine, and not in kind of the like blasé way that we refer to that in general, but deeply and truly that all of the essences of the foods that we're eating are medicine, and flavor is indicative of the medicinal and nutritive properties that these foods have, which is so wild. This is not a new idea, and I'm not the first person to have this idea. I'm just one athlete who has sort of uncovered that it's true for myself. The energetics of the foods that we're eating is a really important and key piece of this. And what that means is that if we think about all of the things that exist on the planet, each living thing has an energetic pattern. And of course, the way that we would ingest those energetic patterns makes a difference on our bodies. And as I said, flavor is a cue into that. There's a comment that says, like, I keep hearing that the gut is a second brain. The gut might be like the most important brain, in fact, because our digestive systems are where we process literally everything from our emotions to our additional hormones. Our guts send signals to our brains to tell us what we need as a functioning being. So my perfect example of this that sort of segues into flavor as fuel, the different flavors that we sense, how to navigate them, is the craving that we all have for sweet, especially as athletes. Everyone has a sweet craving. And typically we kind of, I don't want to say shun, but there's always this like, man, I'm craving this sweet thing, or I have like such a sweet tooth, like what is wrong with me? And as an athlete, if you don't have a sweet tooth of some kind, and if you're not sating that in some way, I'll just say this, we're doing it wrong. We can do it better by acknowledging and honoring that craving. That really means something. The way that we handle it is key to our success. So diving back into flavor, all plants and animals, we've all like developed these cool ways of navigating the world and getting along together, navigating and thriving as one. And colors, flavors, and textures are all cues that our bodies use to navigate the world around us, right? Like you see a super spiky rose, you're not gonna grab hold of it with your hand, you're shying away from this thing. Hummingbirds and the color red, or sharks and the scent of blood. Like those are two very differing examples, but we use our senses to navigate. 2 million years ago, our ancestors were cultivating learned behaviors to navigate the worlds of foods as they were hunting and gathering. And it's absolutely true that if we came across a berry that had a higher residual sugar, we championed that berry and sought it more often. We craved it. And that wasn't a bad thing back then. True that all the things we were looking at were natural and not coming from packages or a food system that's a little bit nuts, but know that was something that they were using as a true deep intuition to navigate the world of food choices. If something was bitter, then they ate less of that thing. If something was sweet, it provided them with energy that they needed to literally walk all day and navigate the world and hunt for food. And that sort of goes back to the balance that we have to strike as athletes to learn to suppress some of our instincts to succeed, but also to listen to others and learn which to elevate and how to manage each sensory experience that we're having, right? Okay, you're ready to know about flavor now. We're all ready to hear about this. So our bodies sense 6 different tastes. Because I'm not a high-tech person, I've created this little sheet that shows what the 6 flavors are. I will try to show them up to the camera so you can see. They are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And you can write those down if you want. I'll also snapshot this and we can share it so that everybody can see all the little properties that are written on this. So you don't have to take a million notes. But if you think about it, if you go back to like your last ride or your last, super warm day out on the bike, you probably have a memory of craving something that's salty or sweet or maybe even sour. And there's a nutrient, I just looked at a comment that I didn't want to forget. What's the word I'm looking for? We can draw a predictable energetic response or associate a predictable energetic response to each of those flavors and our bodies, if that makes sense. The statement I have written down is, even though we are generalizing flavors, and also some flavors change when you put them into combination, there's a predictable energetic influence on our physiology when we consume these types of foods. So let's dive into flavor. The sensation of sweet is a subtle or a dominant sensation that almost all of us crave. The properties of the foods that, like what we benefit from, or the ways that we benefit from these foods are that they cool us down, they anti-inflame our bodies, they soothe our senses and our systems. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, probably not. They ease our digestion, they soothe our muscles, they ease our muscles, like basically help us to relax. They also help us to detoxify and energize. That's the complete opposite of anything we've heard about sugar cravings and refined sugar. Am I right in saying that? Most of us are not associating those properties. But if you consider that, like your most calming meal, like a bowl of oatmeal or a bowl of mac and cheese, which by the way is completely sweet in flavor because it contains the cheese and the grains, or a cookie or a bowl of ice cream, something along those lines. Some of those things contain refined sugar, which we have sort of vilified, but also sweet foods include things like cooked carrots and cooked beets. The examples I've listed here are basil, the flavors of basil, cardamom, cinnamon, mint, and vanilla. All of those are sweet flavors that when we consume them will have that amazing soothing property for us. Bananas, dates, melons, figs, cooked beets and carrots are sweet foods, and they will soothe and satisfy the sweet craving that our bodies have, whether it's from stress or from just a super emotional day. Corn, rice, wheat, beans, ghee, milk, eggs, and beef, salmon, and pork are all sweet flavors that our bodies intuit and then use to soothe our systems. And so to go back on this a little bit, what we experience as athletes is, and what our energetic lifestyles are. I want to talk about that for a minute, because as we're thinking about sweet cravings and when we might have them, there are several different occasions, right? And there's several different ways that we can use this knowledge about flavor being fuel and being nutritive for us to our benefit. If you think about having a ridiculously stressful day or a ridiculously stressful several months where you're stuck at home during a pandemic and you're craving more sweet things, you might be inclined to be like, that's a bad craving. But also these times that we've been in have been some of the most emotional and charged times that any of us have ever experienced. And so the craving to have something sweet that would soothe our emotions is completely natural. I was on a big bike ride yesterday. I took my bike super up into the mountains, and all I wanted but didn't have was a big stack of cookies. And it makes perfect sense because the weather was crazy, the effort was hard, I'd had a big week, and sweet foods were going to soothe me in that moment. Also, sweet foods are what my body wanted because carbohydrates are exactly what my body needs when it's pushing hard. So recognizing that in that moment, a sweet craving is a ridiculously healthy thing for me to have, and that it's time for me to honor it is what I want to be doing as an athlete and as a healthy, like well-rounded human being. If I'm sitting on the couch and I am craving a big slice of cake and I haven't done anything stressful and I have taken 5 naps, maybe my sweet craving is something else, and maybe I should go for a walk around the block and figure out what it is that I'm needing. I'm needing soothing in some way, or maybe I'm just craving sugar. Those things can be a little bit difficult to navigate. And so I think it's important in this moment for me to mention that all bodies are different. All nutrition is different. What works for one person may not work for another person. And figuring out ways to use these flavors as cues and find foods that really fit into your lifestyle is a really important thing. Sweet. Thoughts that that's provoking so far before we dive into these other 5 flavors? Everyone's good. Yeah, this is a good question, and I'm going to answer it right now. how did I start learning my body and cravings and what my body needs versus what I wanted? It was basically trial and error. And probably I had the added pressure of feeling a lot of guilt when I would do things like eat a piece of cake or take a cookie on a bike ride. And it wasn't until I recognized that I didn't sacrifice any element of performance and actually felt the additional added nutritional benefits and well-being benefits of the experience of eating the cookie, which brought me a lot of joy, the essence of eating the cookie, you know, just the like, I'm eating a cookie, like this is play kind of, right? And the sensorial experience of enjoying something that was deeply delicious, not some cardboard shaped and flavored piece of food, right? Real food has real value. Recognizing how to fit those real values into our lives in healthy ways is really the challenge. And so I suppose I would encourage you to take a little bit of like, I'll get to that later, but that's my story, and that's how I came to craft it. And it changes all the time. My body's changing all the time. The ways I'm challenging it are changing all the time. So I'm kind of always having to figure out different ways to weave in these super healthy foods and figure out what my body's really craving. And that can get a little bit more difficult when your body starts craving things like sour foods or pungent foods. So let's dive into those really quickly. This is a good question too about texture. I don't want to forget that one. So sour flavors. Sour flavors we do actually crave quite often. If you've ever craved lemonade, or like lemonade is my favorite example, especially on a hot bike ride, I crave lemonade a lot. Tell me if you guys can see this if I show it up to the camera. Does this really work or not really? Give me the thumbs up or the thumbs down.
I think it's hard to see. You can just read your
I'll read it and then I'll show it later. I had such high hopes for my tiny illustrations. So sour is, I've categorized it here as the urge to pucker up, and properties that are associated with foods that are sour. In Ayurveda, we'd say that these foods moisten us. Basically, they hydrate our bodies, which is really important if we're athletes. The minerals in these foods typically are the agent that's making that happen. They ease our digestion which helps us to, you know, as if easing digestion wasn't something that all of us want, because isn't that so nice? It helps us to detoxify all the things that our bodies are doing while we're in sport and in motion, which is processing a lot of things through our cells. Sour flavors fuel our appetites. So they stoke us up and they help us, they remind us and connect us again to the cravings that we're having from a food and flavor wise perspective. And they stimulate our metabolism. That would be a keyword for people to think like, oh, I should be eating a lot more sour things, but I can't impress enough that all these flavors have to be enjoyed in balance and not just isolating one or two food groups. They have to be enjoyed. And typically if we can enjoy them in a single plate with all the things, we are set. Examples of sour flavors, maybe a few here that will surprise you. Garlic, but also like all citrus fruits, of course. Grapefruits, limes, oranges, lemons, also pickles and tomatoes. Sourdough bread, true sourdough bread is a sour flavor. Butter, cheese is a sour flavor. Yogurt, and then of course all alcohol or vinegar or fermented foods. And my relatable idea here is that if you've ever craved a beer after a long ride, that is a sour flavor. Typically, I crave a beer after the longest, hardest rides. And yes, it's very refreshing. And yes, it's symbolic of relaxation and pleasure, but it actually has a nutritive value. And so if I choose to drink 12 beers, probably different than me choosing to drink one, and recognizing that that actually has, again, like all of the like essential sensorial benefits, but also some nutritive benefits. These flavors help us to focus, digest, energize, and refresh ourselves. And that's really important as athletes. Cravings for gummy bears with kosher salt sprinkled. Yes, this is a true, someone, you're reading my mind here, just reading the chat. Diving into salty flavors. Salty flavors basically come from salt and things that are salty or super mineralized. Food properties of salty foods are, they help us to reduce cramping, they relax our muscles and our tissues, they increase our appetite, which again is really important when we're either working super hard or we're trying to get in touch with the cravings that we're actually feeling. They reduce inflammation in our bodies, they ease digestion, and they also help to like moisten and hydrate our systems, which is super important. Examples of these salty foods are celery, seaweed, salt, soy sauce or tamari sauce, and also some types of cheese, or like tuna fish is actually a salty flavor, while salmon is a sweet flavor. Two totally different types of fish. They live in different types of waters. These are very subtle differences, but they make a real difference. I have a relatable story about salty foods and want to share it really quickly in a nutshell. I was racing the Trans Rockies Run, which is a 6-day ultra running race in the Colorado Rockies quite a few years back. And if any of you have ever ridden or ride often or raced at altitude, it's very common to get some version of altitude sickness. And this can appear like many different things. One of those things can be just that you get super sick. Laura, I know you've experienced this on a couple of occasions. It's horrible. The way this presented for me was a little bit different. I basically just didn't have an appetite. And that was really bad because I was feeling like I wasn't very hungry. And because I was drinking a lot of water, but maybe not consuming enough salt, I felt really bloated. So I had a lot of liquid in my system, but I didn't have a lot of nutrients in my system. And so I finished the 3rd day of this stage race feeling like a pile of poop, to be very honest. And I had this epiphany on the trail earlier in the day. I'd literally run through this like outcropping of mushrooms on the trail. And the first thing I could think of wasn't like, oh, aren't these mushrooms pretty? It was pizza. And so as soon as I got back to town, we ran into Leadville. I went to this pizza parlor down the street that was known for like super deep dish pies with tons of cheese and so much salt and fat. And I think I ate like 2 or 3 pieces of this pizza and drank a Coke and went to bed and slept well and woke up the next day and was back on the podium. And it was because I was eating this super salty, fatty thing that reconnected me again and recharged me basically. Like I have this vision in my mind of this pizza going into my system and like making me grow like Mario Brothers from the video game. That was not the thing that any of my coaches would have ever told me to eat. And that was the thing that my body wanted. And my body was right. Drop mic. Okay, let's talk about pungent foods. Somebody had asked about pungent foods before. These are stimulating and heating. And you probably can guess what these foods are. Chilies are one of them. Leeks, garlic, kohlrabi. Does anyone know? Kohlrabi is like a little round vegetable that's in season right now, and it tastes like broccoli, but it basically looks like this weird alien. It's got some little like leafy vines growing out of the top. Greens, radishes, turnips, raw spinach is a pungent flavor, as it turns out. Black pepper, cardamom, cayenne, ginger, mustard, paprika, and all chili peppers are also pungent. And what these foods do for us are help us to thin our blood. They relax our muscles. They are anti-parasitic, which means they basically help to cleanse our systems of any invasive species. They're vasodilators, so they help us to pump blood through our veins faster because our veins expand. And they're also diaphoretic, which means that they help us to sweat. If that's a problem for you, it is not for me, but it will help us to sweat. So if you're eating a lot of pungent foods before you go out for a big ride and you're super sweaty, like know to prepare for that. These foods warm our bodies up. And that can be a really great thing, but it can also be a really harmful thing if we're already running pretty hot, which is to say that if we've had a super stressful week and we're training really hard and we go and eat really spicy chili, our bodies are going to be really unhappy because we're basically stacking heat on heat on heat on heat. And so learning to use pungent flavors in moderation and to add them where we want a small amount of stoke or want to boost our digestive fire is a cool practice. Recognizing where other foods are cooling, and we're going to get to a couple of those here, is also really important. Yeah, pungency is about the yes, exactly. Chemisthetic compounds. It's about literally what the chemical makeup of this food is and how that energetically interacts with our physiology and how other things and activities in our lives have created a physiology for us or a constitution, right? It is fascinating. Yes, I agree. Let's talk about a couple of cooling foods now and flavors that we don't think we crave as often, although perhaps in essence we are. The flavor of bitter, which is a deeply, deeply cleansing flavor. it's avoided by some people and loved by others. And the flavor that I'm thinking of that is often avoided is like wheatgrass. People do not love wheatgrass. The food properties, it stimulates our nervous systems, it reduces fat, it helps us to anti-inflame, it's antibacterial, it eases our digestion, and it's a diuretic as well. These are leafy greens, collards, eggplant, sesame seeds, sesame oil, and a whole host of spices like cumin and dill and saffron and turmeric. These things are going to chill our systems out. So after a big ride where you've created a ton of heat, a lot of stress, eating something like this to help you basically go like this, and probably something sweet at the same time, like eating a big bowl of savory oatmeal that's got both maple syrup and turmeric would be a really good idea. And then the last flavor, I'm looking at our time and wanting to make sure we make space for some questions too. Astringent flavor, which is the flavor of dryness. Doesn't that sound so delicious? But these are things that we also crave. Examples of astringent foods are apples, bananas, cranberries, pomegranates, avocados, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrots, pasta, popcorn, and also chicken is randomly, chicken is an astringent flavor in Ayurveda. But these foods help our muscles to tone. They help us to reduce sweat actually, so be careful. And they cool excess heat and anti-inflame our bodies. I have a bunch of other notes on here that I want to make sure you guys all get a chance to see, but the point in reading this off to you is to let you know that all those things, you know, if you're craving a salad and then you're craving a cookie afterwards, like there's something to that. And there is something to craving a salad for, not for the sake of salad, but for the flavor of salad's sake, if that makes sense. As a person who gets off the bike and literally wants nothing but just that anti-inflame, my body basically is like, give me all the bitter things. I don't really want the sweet things anymore. I want the bitter things, except for yesterday when all I wanted was a huge bowl of, or a huge bag of chips and a root beer float, as it turns out. It was a really big ride. Let's put this all together. So how can we take this knowledge, which is obviously super deep, multifaceted. There's so much to know about this. I could talk about it for hours. I've written about it quite a bit on my blog. How do we learn how to literally absorb these flavors into our lives and craft new systems for fueling ourselves as athletes? I have a couple of ideas for you that have worked for me and hopefully can resonate. The first is learning to read your body and not the label, honoring cravings when you're having them for whatever that is, and really listening to whatever that may be. Recognizing that all the flavors have space in your diet and honoring that. The second thing is to add salt. And I know that seems one-dimensional, but by adding a pinch of salt to just about anything and everything you're eating, to include your toast in the morning or your oatmeal or the gummy bears that you're eating on your ride, you're going to open up your palate and you're going to figure out more and more exactly what the fine tuning of those flavors you're craving is, and it'll allow you to pick foods accordingly. And if that means that and that will help you to learn to navigate the emotional drive, and the physical drive too, right? Not just the idea of I want a piece of cake, but I want something sweet, and what is that thing? The third piece of advice I have is to steer to savory. So especially on your rides, steer your sports nutrition or your fueling towards savory foods that provide you with salt and the multitude of anti-inflammatory properties while you're already on your ride, instead of just soothing and adding carbohydrates. I tend to like to do a balance of this, so I'll take savory rice cakes and cookies or something along those lines on very long rides, and also bookending your ride food with something that's super savory, really focusing on getting all of those different flavors. Try to aim for 6 in each of those meals, before and after. The fourth tip I have is to celebrate sweet. Really honor that one. For us as athletes, it's a really important one to listen to, because we need a lot of soothing, and we also need a lot of carbohydrates, and how we get them is a really big deal. And then the fifth piece of advice I have is literally just to give yourself permission to taste and to enjoy your food on a completely different and deeper level. I could probably have led this talk by just saying, like, sweet things are okay, your foods have lots of flavors, give yourself permission to do that. That's really what I want to convey, is that all of these things have really deep nutritive and physiological benefits, and to dive into them. So that we have enough time, I want to give some space to questions and to alert you to the idea that I've got a couple of articles that I'm going to share with you about fueling for endurance, diving a little bit more into the 6 flavors and what they do for us. There's another article that's up on my blog about sweet and why it's okay to taste it and enjoy it. And then there's also some recipes that I'm going to share with you for fuel before and after and during your rides too. Best webinar ever. Love cookies. Love you. Thank you. I don't want to miss any of these things that were questions.
How about
Margaritas.
Lentine? I think the last question, Jenny said, I religiously drink mini Cokes non-diet after or during long rides. My gut tells me it's right. Thoughts on that? Is my gut right?
Yeah, there's a lot of value, especially if you can drink the mini Cokes that are made with cane sugar, because you don't have a lot of the extra stuff that has no energetic benefit whatsoever. Cane sugar does have an energetic benefit for us. I think it's totally fine and makes perfect sense to me that you'd want to drink Coke after your ride. Even better if we can find a way to get more carbohydrate stores in your body before your ride, so you're not driven to just ingest them and use them right up. Because I'm going to bet that what your body's doing is basically you put that Coke in and it is gone already. So finding ways to perhaps sprinkle sweet treats, whether that's more cooked vegetables or more fruits or more healthfully concocted, alchemized desserts in, whatever that looks like. I think that's great. Yes to Coke.
Mm-hmm. What about raw foods after a long ride, like in a poke bowl, uncooked fish and veggies?
Yeah. So quick note about raw foods. Raw foods in terms of like vegetables, especially leafy green vegetables, are actually really, really hard for us to digest. So raw foods in moderation, to include any type of fish or vegetables, I think is great, so long as you're not eating raw foods alone, which put a tremendous burden on your digestive system. And what happens, unfortunately, when we're living full lives, keeping full training schedules, and eating raw foods, is that our bodies basically just can't keep up, and they will fail to absorb all the foods that we're eating. And that means that now, even though we may be eating those foods, we're not absorbing their nutrients, and now we're nutrient deficient, which is a really big problem, because our bodies are going to find new ways to do that stuff. So absolutely, raw, there's nothing that tastes better, I think, actually, than eating like a raw poke bowl with all like the seaweed and all that, so many good things in there, especially if it's salty. Just use it in moderation and make sure to eat plenty of cooked things as well.
Awesome. Alex is asking, she's curious to get your opinion on, I don't know this word, kokumi/umami and fat as tastes. Do our Ayurvedic classifications reference these at all?
Yes. So umami is not referenced in Ayurveda as a taste, but all flavors that basically what umami is the Japanese version of all the flavors together that Ayurveda suggests. So if we're going to create the most optimal bowl or plate of food, it's going to contain all of the 6 flavors, and umami is those 6 flavors mashed together. So they're saying the same thing. Umami foods are championed in Japanese cuisine. Anytime we can use ingredients that we have and love to create that same thing, which is basically a checklist, right? Of, did I get something sweet? Did I get something salty? Did I get something pungent? Da 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 da. We create our own umami. Fat is not a taste, but fat, if you're really diving into Ayurveda, fat does have a cooling effect on the body, and eating too much of it at different times can completely extinguish our digestive fire. So we're diving down a super deep hole here. Different fatty foods, say like coconut, for example, is, I'm pretty certain, there's a lot to know about this, but I'm pretty certain that coconut is actually an astringent flavor. And so it is cleansing for us, and it's a fat, whereas salmon is also a fat, but it's sweet. Dive in more. Let's investigate.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any
Cheez-Its,
last minute questions?
So good. Sprinkled salt on your ice cream. Yes to that. I totally support that. Margaritas with the salt rim afterwards. Yeah, ladies, this is also good. There's, as I said, there's so much to dive into here. If you have any questions at all, or if you're thinking about food, feel free to send me a direct message or send me an email. or peruse the blog. And if you're looking for something that you don't find there, I think this is a super important conversation to keep going. It's a lot to learn. It's a lot to figuring out a totally different way of like listening to your body and navigating the food world, especially because our kind of conventional food system is really broken. We can do it together.
Lentine, what's your blog address is your name, lentinealexis.com.
Yeah, the blog address is just my name. I'll type it here. And my Instagram handle, where I often drop links for recipes or have conversations, or it's also a good place to get in touch with me if you don't want to send an email, is Lentine and here, actually, I'll drop these here because I have them all right here. So let me just put them in the chat, and you're welcome to click as you like. That was a lot. Oops.
We can also add it to the overview blog when we put your video up and have that information there in that post.
Okay, here. I'll drop this here just in case someone's super curious, but let's add it again.